Can the world survive Donald Trump? Every era has a political figure who seems to stretch the limits of a system, someone whose personality becomes inseparable from the institutions around them. In our time, Donald Trump has occupied that role. The question that increasingly surfaces in global conversation is not simply whether his policies are effective or damaging, but something more existential. Can the world survive Trump? It is a dramatic question, but it reflects a genuine unease about how fragile the international order may be when confronted by a leader who thrives on disruption. To answer it honestly, we must first remember that the world has survived disruptive leaders before. Democracies have endured demagogues, empires have survived erratic rulers, and international systems have weathered periods of volatility. Political systems are designed, at least in theory, to absorb personality shocks. Institutions, alliances, bureaucracies, and legal frameworks exist precisely so that the whims of any single individual cannot fully dominate the course of history. Yet Trump represents something different from the usual disruptive politician. His political style treats global diplomacy less like a network of delicate agreements and more like a televised negotiation. Alliances are framed as transactions. International norms are treated as optional. Rivalries are amplified through spectacle. In this environment, politics begins to resemble entertainment, dramatic, polarizing, and emotionally charged. For many voters, this approach is refreshing. It rejects the slow, technocratic language of traditional politics and replaces it with blunt declarations. Supporters often see Trump as someone who finally says out loud what others only imply. In an age of political frustration, that rawness can feel honest. But honesty and stability are not always the same thing. International systems depend heavily on predictability. Trade routes, military alliances, and diplomatic agreements all operate on the assumption that tomorrow will broadly resemble today. When a leader constantly challenges those assumptions, the ripple effects spread far beyond national borders. The Strait of Hormuz, for instance, has recently become a focal point of global anxiety. When tensions escalate there, whether through military action or political rhetoric, the entire energy market trembles. Oil prices surge, economies feel the strain, and countries thousands of miles away suddenly find themselves pulled into the consequences of a single regional conflict. This is where Trump's style of politics becomes particularly consequential. By framing geopolitical conflicts in terms of victory, dominance, or spectacle, the risk emerges that complex diplomatic realities become simplified into narratives of winning and losing. The world, unfortunately, is rarely that simple. War is not a video game. It does not end when one side declares success. It continues in the form of economic disruption, humanitarian crises, and long-term instability. The language of triumph may energize domestic audiences, but it rarely resolves the deeper problems that produce the conflict in the first place. Yet the real question is not whether Trump creates turbulence. Turbulence is common in politics. The deeper question is whether global systems are resilient enough to withstand it. History suggests that they often are. The international order is not a single structure that can collapse overnight. It is a web of institutions, NATO, the United Nations, the European Union, global trade networks, and countless diplomatic agreements. These systems are not perfect, but they possess a kind of inertia. They resist sudden collapse because too many actors depend on them. Even leaders who seek to disrupt the system often find themselves constrained by it. Military commanders, economic advisors, allied governments, and domestic courts all impose limits. Markets react, voters respond, allies push back. In this sense, the world is not controlled by a single figure, no matter how powerful he appears. Trump may bend the system, but bending is not the same as breaking. What his presidency reveals, however, is something more subtle: how fragile the tone of international politics can be. Diplomacy has always relied on a kind of theatrical politeness, carefully chosen words that allow rivals to disagree without escalating into conflict. Trump dismantles much of that theater. He replaces coded language with blunt confrontation. For supporters, this is refreshing authenticity. For diplomats, it is destabilizing. But perhaps the deeper lesson lies not in Trump himself, but in the conditions that produced him. Trump did not emerge in a vacuum. His rise reflects years of economic anxiety, cultural division, distrust of institutions, and the feeling among many voters that traditional political elites no longer represent them. The world is not simply reacting to Trump the individual, it is reacting to a wider political mood that exists across many countries. Populist leaders appear wherever large groups of people feel ignored. Seen this way, Trump is less a singular anomaly and more a symptom of a broader political shift. The forces that brought him to power, anger at globalization, distrust of media, and frustration with political bureaucracy, exist across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. So perhaps the more important question is not whether the world can survive Trump. The real question is whether global democracies can adapt to the frustrations that made Trump possible. If institutions evolve, if they become more transparent, more responsive, and less insulated from public sentiment, then disruptive figures may lose some of their power. If they fail to adapt, then Trump will not be the last leader to challenge the stability of the international order. The world has survived emperors, revolutionaries, dictators, and Cold Wars. It will likely survive Trump as well. But survival should not be mistaken for resolution. The turbulence surrounding his presidency is a signal that the political landscape is shifting. Old assumptions about diplomacy, alliances, and leadership are being tested in real time. In that sense, Trump may be less the end of the world than the beginning of a new political era, one in which the relationship between power, media, and public emotion is far more volatile than anything we have seen before. The world will survive. The question is, what kind of world emerges on the other side?